All wings, report in. Austin, standing by.
Mike, standing by.
Austin, standing by.
The Rogue 3 podcast is locked on target. Whether it's movies, shows, books, comics, or more, we're going to be coming to you from a galaxy far, far away to celebrate all things Star Wars. Hey guys, welcome to the Rogue 3 podcast. We're excited to be joining you here today. Again, I'm Austin.
I'm Mike.
And I'm Austin.
We are going to be discussing Alexander Freed's novel, Reign of the Empire, The Mask of Fear. And we're excited to get into it with y'all.
Yeah, over the last month or so, all three of us have read the book, taken notes, and are going to try and talk about both our spoiler-free and then our full of spoiler reviews of the book.
Yeah, this is really exciting for us because this book coming out is kind of what inspired us to do the podcast to begin with. We knew we were all excited about the book and wanted to talk about it. We figured we might as well record it.
And besides shows, we've never read a book at the same time together. So even separate from this, I've never done that with really anyone for a Star Wars book before. So that it was a lot of fun to kind of hear little thoughts and feelings. And now I'm really ready to dive in and see how you guys liked it.
We've been trying, I think, to hold off a little bit.
I say, yeah, this is the first time we've actually discussed it. We've all shared our excitement about the book and that we've been enjoying it, but we haven't really broken it down together.
All right. Do you guys want to go ahead and get started? What do you all think about it? Mike, what about you?
I really enjoyed it. I wasn't sure because I knew it's going to be a more of a political, a less action heavy book. And I really enjoyed it. I thought topically it's very, very relevant to things going on in the world right now, in the United States right now. And so that was almost at times frustrating to read. It's very salient, it's very raw for some things, but once I kind of got past the first couple chapters, that faded away, and it really dragged me into, okay, this is a different world. This is Star Wars, and seeing these characters, a lot of them that we've seen before, we've heard from them, we've seen them in different ways, was a lot of fun. I really liked getting to see Mon Mothma at this time period, and Bail Organa, and then Saw Gerrera. All three of them have been so essential to the rebellion in different ways, and we really got to see a lot more of them. It was really, really a fun read.
Yeah, this is definitely one of my top books that's been in the new canon. I love this book. If I had to describe it to someone trying to entice them to read, I would say reading this felt like watching Andor, and that's incredibly high praise. There was a lot in this book that I didn't expect, but they promised, the beginning of the rebellion. They promised political machinations between Mon Mothma and Bail Organa, and getting to see Saw continue to do his early rebellion work, and it delivered on all those fronts. Yeah, I couldn't have been more pleased with it.
And I like that you mentioned Andor right off the start, because I had just rewatched it over the last few weeks, kind of getting towards season 2. And one of the things that I realized, which I didn't know, I had finished this book but was watching it, Mask of Fear comes from the manifesto
Oh, does
in
it?
Andor, and I didn't realize that until I was watching through it again. And that was one of those things where I was like, "Oh, there it is!" Like, I love those little
that's
Easter eggs,
brilliant.
those little
It's
things.
amazing.
Yeah, it was one of those ones where I didn't realize it until you go back and watch something or read it again and be like, "Oh, there's connections here I didn't even make."
That's something that's so special about Star Wars novels is they're all written by so many different people, so you would expect it to feel disjointed, and it really doesn't. They somehow, and some novels are better at it than others, but somehow they're able to bring different authors together or different creators together to create a really cohesive experience. Especially this book was absolutely released in anticipation of the second season of Andor, so it absolutely pulled from that. I absolutely love the book. I'm going to go out on a limb and say it's probably my favorite Star Wars book so far. I really,
High
really
praise.
enjoyed it. High praise. I really, it's so funny that you feel like you hear people on the internet talk about they don't want to hear about the politics in Star Wars, and that's boring. I think it's the most interesting piece in Austin. I know that you're kind of with me on that front. It was so fun, especially those Mon Mothma chapters, to dig into how politics worked and kind of like shady backdoor dealings, fat cats with cigar. It was really fun to see her talking to former separatist leaders and such. So that was absolutely thrilling. I found the Saw Gerrera chapters fine. They were good. They weren't super interesting to me as much as the Bale and the Mon Mothma chapters, but overall, extremely well done. I was a little bit worried. I had read Alexander Freed's novel Battlefront Twilight Company before, and it was good. It was good. I liked it a lot. It was absolutely a war novel, and that's not really what I'm into. I don't necessarily need a lot of action for my Star Wars. I like more of the political stuff. The more mystical stuff is fun. So that one wasn't my favorite, but this one was absolutely stunning, and he absolutely knows how to write a political thriller. It was great.
Star Wars is politics, right?
Star Wars is politics.
I really got to flex my poli sci major muscles in this one.
So we're gonna hear you bring that out, right?
Yes, I
Yeah.
hope. Yeah, it was great to see these people that we've seen in action roles or in other scenarios. We know so much more about Mon Mothma, some from Andor, but a lot more afterwards. And Alexander Freed has covered that with Alphabet Squadron of the post Empire. But now he's gotten to dive into the immediate aftermath of the creation of the Empire, and so kind of get a different era of her, which was really great.
I think we can conclude that we all have a pretty ring endorsement of the book and would encourage anybody to read it. But I think this is probably a good time to transition to spoilers. Any
Let's
final thoughts, you guys?
Go out and read it if you haven't.
go out and read it. Absolutely recommend you go read it before you listen to the spoiler piece, because there's a lot of little things that maybe you won't appreciate as much unless you're reading them live if you hear us talk about them. Obviously, we know how the story is going to end, but at least the journey is interesting.
I think especially with Andor season 2 coming out, there's going to be so many more connections and things that tie this into that if you're looking forward to Andor season 2, I think this is a good pickup.
I can only imagine the stuff that's in Andor season 2 that we don't even know about yet that's already been planted in this book. That's going to be really fun to watch. This is the first time I've read one of these lead up books actually leading up to the project that it's leading up to. So I'm thrilled. This is great. um, I think we're ready to transition off to spoilers. So long, those of you who have not read the book, and those of you who unfortunately can't stay away from spoilers, like me, hang in there. It's gonna be fun. Spoiler thoughts, Austin. What are you thinking?
So right off the bat, this book had me like absolutely gripped from before it even started by having those two intro pages with the Palpatine quote and the Padme quote, and that's how they launched it. And it's what's so fascinating is neither of those characters are in the book, but they both loom over it so heavily, and their influence is felt throughout the whole thing. And I think just that level of thought really seeps into every page of this book. I loved it. I thought the political stuff was incredible. Watching Mon slave over this bill to try to get it written, watching Bale be like tormented over bearing the weight of he's the only non like force related person in the galaxy that knows what happened and he can't do anything about it. I thought was incredible seeing him kind of bear the brunt of that. The other aspect of this book was the Saw Gerrera chapters. And I thought, as to Austin's point earlier, those were definitely my least favorite chapters, but I thought they were done interestingly. I thought it was an interesting choice to have his chapters not be from his perspective. Like the Mon chapters and the Bale chapters were both from their point of view, but Saw's chapters were from the perspective of mostly Sojin and then a couple of his other members of his group. Now that was a really interesting choice. I'm excited to see. I feel like they really set up Kanara, one of Saw's partisans, to be a bigger feature in the subsequent books. But I'm excited to see where it goes. I definitely wasn't bored in those chapters, but as a politics junkie, I was really ready to get back to the political stuff.
I think the same thing with, is it Kanara or Karam?
Kamara, I think it's Kamara, isn't it?
Kamara. I think the same thing with
Still,
Haki and Chemish.
Yes.
Those two also being an outsider to this group of three, really coming from inside the Imperial mechanism and this ISB, but still continuing on after kind of the climax of the story. They still have chapters, they still have story. And so I expect them to continue in this trilogy and be a part of things going forward. And curious, we've seen a lot of stories of Imperials who start out with the Imperials, realize that they're doing bad things, and then they go to the rebellion. Whether that will happen with some of those characters.
It's funny that I feel like when we look at this book, we say it's three different points of view, and that's really not the case. Like you mentioned, Hockey and Chemish have their own entire sections of the book where we kind of get to see the not really ISB. It's kind of like a ISB adjacent where they're supposed to be investigating things, they're listening in on things, but they're not completely brainwashed into the machinations of the empire so much as they're just doing their jobs. These are just two people who this is their job. They're they're obviously open to hearing things. Um, One of the three times that I thought Hockey was dead, I thought Hockey died so many times in this book, and then she didn't. And I think it's so funny that she lived through the whole thing. But she told Chemish something along the lines of, your people are important, your work is important, and your empire is important in that order. And I don't remember if that's the exact order, exactly what she said, but the gist was that what she was saying to Chemish is that they need to take care of themselves and their people before they worry about serving their empire. And I think that that itself shows that Hockey is really open to that change, like you said, Mike, to go from someone who's imperial, undeniably, to being someone who perhaps realizes the empire isn't right and kind of moves in with what will eventually become the rebellion. So I thought that was really interesting. I thought they played an interesting part in the book.
Well, and I thought Chemish too, their chapters really kind of give us more perspective on like what's happening on the ground in Coruscant and like what people are actually caring about, and kind of gave us a glimpse into the anti-separatist movement. The 4040s was that one radical group they got involved with, and I think that was really valuable perspective because Mon and Vale, as well intentioned as they are definitely like in a literal tower above the people on the ground, and they have their ideals and everything, but seeing Chemish's perspective really allowed us to get a glimpse for the common man.
And I really like when we dive into some of the underworld of Coruscant and with the 4040 group and Chemish and Hockey, we get to see some more of those layers. We really got to see more of what happened to them during Battle of Coruscant and the buildings that have gotten just utterly destroyed that we've in canon, nothing on the planet has ever been seen. We have Star Wars Clone Wars, but nothing else, I think, has ever talked about that battle and what happened on the ground there.
I think we think of it mostly as an in space type of battle, and that is absolutely not the case. It's interesting to see some of the fallout. It's interesting to see. I think we really dove into the war weary people, the people who are just like, this is too hard. I'm not going to fight against this. We're stable right now. Let's just keep it how it is. And again, undeniably, there's parallels to the real world. It's easier to just say, things are stable right now. I'm okay. I'm not going to do anything because stability is safer. It's easier than fighting against someone who currently is not doing anything to me.
One thing I think in related to getting other perspective, I think is really neat that this book did. I don't know that in any other canon material we've gotten this much exploration of a separatist. We got to see a lot of both from Mon interacting with the former separatist senators and corporate groups, as well as Sojin being a separatist soldier on the ground. Really gave us an idea into what their ideology was, how they view they went wrong, and seeing them try to integrate back into a society that doesn't want them. I think was really interesting. The scene where Mon goes before all the separatist senators and has to like plead her case to get them to join her bill was maybe my favorite chapter in the book. First of all, it was great Mon character work, but also getting to hear the separatists kind of explain their grievances. Clone Wars, the TV show, did a decent job trying to show that the separatists had some justification, but the bulk of
Heroes
the
on both
show is,
sides.
yeah, heroes on both sides, evil is everywhere. But the show does a decent job of trying to like humanize separatists a little bit, but the bulk of the show is, Newt Gunray bad, Count Dooku bad. I thought this did a good job being like these were people that had like genuine grievances that this republic wasn't addressing, and I thought it did a good job fitting that into a very packed book.
It was interesting that the separatists had like a little shadow senate. Like it seemed like they were all like keeping aligned within themselves. So they're really not, I mean, they're reintegrating into the Republic or the Empire rather, but they're not like, they're obviously still separatists. I mean, they still have the intention of it, and they're doing this because this is what's better for their people, I suppose, better, quote unquote, for their people. So I thought that was interesting. I thought it was interesting how they're all aligned, how they all are going to act together, and they're all going to agree on the rebirth bill together rather than do it individually.
I drew a lot of parallels with Mon Mothma working with the separatists and talking about how, yes, we were Republic versus separatists, but now it's us versus the Empire. And Ezra in Rebels does a very similar thing with Rex and a battle droid contingent that's left. That he says, if you didn't win and you didn't win, then who did? And it's the Empire. And now they're all kind of trying to work together to prevent that Empire from taking more power and pushing them out. And so I saw it very much that way of the Republic lost and the Separatists lost, and the Empire has supplanted us both. But we can still try and scrap. It doesn't really work out very well in the end, but
Yeah,
That
and
leads into at the very end of the book, which is this was one of my favorite bits, was when Mon Mothma was aboard that ship and Masamita was there, and he took her to what is it? What is it called? Camp One?
Center
Control
One.
Center One. That's right, Center
Yes.
One, which is so like sterile sounding. It's so like clinical and it does not sound like what it actually is, which I think is kind of interesting. And basically him being like, yes, you did win, except not really, because we won. And no matter what you do, we're going to continue to win. And it was interesting this entire book, we're rooting for this rebirth bill to pass. And everything's leading up to it passing, and at the very end we realize, oh, it passed and we're excited, and then we get to part 4 of the book and it's like, no, actually this is how it works. He's the emperor and he can take away whatever he wants out of that bill, and he's going to take away everything that really matters from the bill. That was scary.
You
That was
expect
really
that
scary.
bill, you expect that bill to fail the whole time.
Whole
And when it
well,
passes, it's like, oh wow, it did it.
well, I'm
And
like,
then
what's gonna, because I, it's not gonna do anything because we know where the series is gonna end. But I expected it to just fail there, and we would have been like, all right, let's try something else, friends. But it passed, and I love that it passed, and it didn't matter. It didn't matter that it passed. And that's really fascinating and really scary at the same time. The idea that something like that could happen, is when you have to ask yourself, is that possible for enough people to want something and to support something and for it to not even matter because there's leadership in charge who doesn't care.
well, and talking about scary, I thought Masamita was so intimidating in that final chapter. He's not outside of the Clone Wars. He's not really appeared in a lot of material. And the only thing I can think of otherwise is the Aftermath books, and in those he's like very much down on his luck, like the Empire's falling apart, and he's not having a good time. But here he was so scary, and I remember like. When I was reading and Mom came around the corner and saw Mass, I was expecting it to be Palpatine.
I was too. I was too.
And
yeah,
I thought, first of all, I thought they used Mass like it's the best possible they could have used him. And I also think it was a good move to not use Palpatine. I think
Well, we're
Palpatine should
saving
be
him.
used sparingly. Yeah,
Yeah.
we got 2 more books for him to show up if they
right.
need him to.
But also I like the idea that it's not even worth Palpatine's time. It's not even worth Palpatine's time to come do this.
Well, and that
So
was
he
the
sends his
theme of it.
lackey.
Like that was the
Yeah.
point of the interaction was that like
None of it was
Mass
worth
was
his
like,
time.
please continue to rebel in the Senate and like have your like pitiful little bills that aren't going to do anything to stop. And it was the whole line of like Palpatine's thinking in centuries,
Yeah.
and that was a big, that was a fantastic moment.
I
Oh,
just
that was.
imagine I imagine Masamita when she turns the corner, he's just slow clapping
Oh yeah.
for her and be like,
Nicely done.
congratulations.
Congratulations.
It means literally nothing. Yeah, I felt the same way. I expected Palpatine at the end to pull pull the rug out somehow and be there and talk to the Senate just like he did in Bad Batch and just turn it on everyone's head and be like, this is great. He can use this for his own gain. And he doesn't even need to show up to do it.
If you only watch the movies, first of all, you're not even gonna know who this is. He's there, but he's just this random blue guy who sits with the Chancellor in all three movies. Actually, I was wondering this while I was reading the book. Was Masamita in on it since Phantom Menace? Was he planted there by Palpatine? And maybe in Legends it might have said something. In canon, do we know what it says?
I don't know if he was in on it from Phantom Menace. We do know he knew about it during the Clone Wars because there's a
Yes,
scene
yes.
in one of the episodes. Padme stops one of Palpatine's plans, and Palpatine and Masamita have a conversation about it. And
Oh, I remember Palpatine.
it's very much a hood up conversation, not a
With that, right?
grandfatherly Palpatine
Well, I think it
conversation.
even does that with his like eyes or something. I don't know, but
Yeah.
I just remember him saying this line that for now they're just going to let the wheels of democracy turn. And I don't know, there's something so sinister about that because you think, oh, that's a good thing, like democracy's working, but that's so like, I don't know, it's scary. It's scary.
Before we move off of the Mon Mothma stuff, 'cause I know we have two other large sections of the book to talk about. I just wanted to talk about like the bill writing process. This was very realistic.
Good.
This is probably the most realistic I've read, like a political novel that wasn't like explicitly like about real world politics. The whole thing of like going to talking to different people and like, what can I put in this bill to make it enticing? And then it became this giant bloated mess to the point where the people that were on her side didn't want to vote for it anymore. But that's like actually very realistic. And mom was putting all these various different pieces in there just to get these individual votes. And at the end, she like hated the bill. She didn't like what it was anymore, but it was going to get her close to where she wanted to be. That's like political calculations politicians are doing every day.
Do we know with the Imperial Senate how many senators? We know it's tens of thousands of worlds. Think about our bills in the United States and how big they are and how many people are contributing pieces to them. That there's thousands of people trying to contribute to these bills in the Imperial Senate at this point. That they must be huge.
The delegation of 2,000, that's 2,000
But
senators.
it's not even that many when you think about it. Compare for the entire Galactic Senate.
Yeah, but like I just can't even begin to imagine having a coalition of that many people. Trying to maintain that many people happy is kind of absurd. And I guess it kind of goes to show like why the Republic probably doesn't really work as a governing body when it's
Because it's
that
too much.
large. Yeah,
Did you guys read the acknowledgments at the end?
No.
I don't remember.
So it's interesting that you said, like you said, he did a really good job capturing what politics would feel like. He says, given this novel's subject matter, I could cite a nearly endless list of journalists, historians, and political memoirists whose work provided fodder and food for thought. Rather than picking only a few, I'll simply note that concocting political fiction is surely easier than studying political fact. Your work is invaluable to the functioning of any democracy, whether real or in a galaxies far, far away. I thought and I mean, he clearly studied. I don't know what his political background is. I don't know if he's written other political novels. Like I said before, I thought that most of his stuff, like with Alphabet Squadron and Battlefront, Twilight Company, I thought it was mostly like war stuff. So I thought it was interesting that he dove into political fiction, and it sounds like he really worked hard to make it realistic. So I
It
thought that was
shows.
interesting. Yeah, it does. It
Yeah.
absolutely shows. Any other thoughts here, guys? Before we move on to, we were talking about Mon Mothma for a long while. Let's talk about Bale.
I think Bale is a good transition point.
I love Bale. Let's do it.
He kicks
Yeah,
off the book for us.
He sure does.
Vale is by far the biggest surprise for me in this book. I enjoyed, and this is a theme. Like I guess we can talk about it some here, but there was nothing in the book I didn't enjoy, but something I kind of had a hard time squaring with other Star Wars material is the way this book portrayed Mon and Bale's relationship.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I feel like in everything else we've read, they've been portrayed as good friends. And a lot of that does happen after this book. There's definitely stuff before this book. Or I guess it was 2 nights ago, as a normal person does, I went and read about a third of Queen's Shadow that was covering Padme, Mon, and Bale's relationship. And in that book, like, Padme wants to get into the good graces of Mon, and she uses Vale as stepping stone to get there because they're such good friends. And I think it was weird that this book portrayed them as stronger than acquaintances, but not quite friends. And like Mon very much like viewed Vale with a little bit of like distaste.
Hmm.
And I thought it was interesting. I understand why it mattered for this book, like the structure of this book, but I thought it was a weird setup.
She describes him as almost pompous, right? Like a
Hmm.
little bit high to do, which he is married to the queen of a world. But I agree. I think my first note that I wrote down was that their relationship not just being straight up friendly, or friends rather. They're friendly, but they're not very close friends at that point, was so different than what I was expecting.
Hmm.
Well, and the part that was very interesting to me was this book really portrayed Mon as like not an ideologue, and most of her material is about her being an ideologue. Like in talking about Queen's Shadow, she and Padme have like lots of debates about because Mon's like such an ardent pacifist that she believes that like the Naboo should not have risen up against the Trade Federation. And like Padme like pushes back on her with that. In Rebels, her like pacifism is like kind of what holds the Rebel Alliance back for a bit. And so I think it's very interesting that they chose to make her the one that was like willing to sacrifice her ideals so early in this process, whereas Bale had a lot more trouble doing that.
I think that between the three of them, I feel like they were trying to make a balance here where we have the idealist in Bale, we have the warmonger in Saw, and then we have the person who bridges the two together in Mon Mothma. I agree, it felt a little weird. I'm wondering if maybe it almost feels like maybe we're missing a story here.
And I do remember there is some talk from Mon about why she feels this way about Bale. And I think it relates to that he would work with Palpatine if it would suit him in certain scenarios. We see him with Palpatine right after Padme's ship is blown up in Attack of the Clones, and he's there meeting with Palpatine and the other senators. And so I think she has now seen this is what Palpatine has done, and he's someone that maybe would work with him still, would try and find ways for it to suit him. He bends, right? And she kind of breaks in some ways. She's not as maybe flexible at that point in her beliefs, but by the end, now she has. Now that has gone through a major change. She says the word to blow him up.
See, I don't know, 'cause I feel like if anything, it might be the reverse because she gets frustrated at Bale because he's idealistic, and she's like, "You're not coming to the table on this bill." She's like this is the best we have, and like it's great that you care about the Jedi and like seeking justice and everything, but that's not going to like make demonstrable progress. So it's a very like interesting setup, and I think, and I don't blame him for doing it. I think Free decided he wanted those three segments, and he decided to fit the characters where he needed them to. And I think it makes for an excellent book. I think it does create some problems with like other canon material, but it's nothing that's not irreconcilable.
Are there any other books that really dive into Bale that much? Besides like a couple scenes here and there, there's not really that many.
I think the most Vale we get is Leia, Princess of Alderaan.
Hmm.
And he's heavily featured in that book because he's like teaching Leia how to be a politician and eventually how to be a rebel. But that I think that might be the uh most we get of him.
Especially deep dives, like he's in a lot of Clone Wars, but we really don't dive into him. He's like the not in a bad way, but the stagnant character who's just kind of like the voice of reason here. But we don't actually learn that much about him or the way he works in his
He's
head.
always
Um,
he's always the orator, right? He's always the one that's going to get up and give the speech and win everyone over in the end.
which was very true in this book too. I mean, he was
Right.
very much painted as the guy who can win everyone over. Everyone listens to Bail Organa. Some people just have that power over people, and Mon Mothma apparently does not.
I did like seeing him early on as a dad for Leia. You brought her up,
Yeah.
so it made me start thinking about that of seeing his concern for his child and what the future holds for her, especially her connection to the Jedi. Right? We know her father, we know her mother, And that's kind of bringing them both together, both politician and Jedi, and what it means to be either one of those things in this moving forward empire. And his concern, even though he's putting himself in danger a lot, which we have seen as well. He's the one that goes right to the Jedi Temple during Order 66. But I also like that return to Leia, this child that he's now learning to take care of. He's very much a doting father. If she's crying, he wants to be there. That kind of stuff was really fun to see.
Well, and I don't think any other material has linked Bail to the Jedi so deeply as this book has,
Mhm.
but it makes a lot of sense. Like in the Clone Wars TV show, he's with the Jedi a good bit. Like, he goes on different missions and stuff, but he's never like super. We don't really get in his head about what he's watching. But in Revenge of the Sith, like as you mentioned, he when he saw the temple on fire, he just went straight there, which is like a crazy thing. And then he's like made aware of everything that happened between Yoda and Palpatine and Anakin and Obi-Wan. Like he has all that context, and he has a little Jedi baby, and he's like slavishly devoted to clearing the Jedi's name. And I think a lot of us can probably relate to being frustrated when there's something you really care about on like a social or political level, and it seems like nobody else cares about it, and you're like, the world is on fire, and why are we not talking about this? Why am I the only person that cares about this? And surely if other people knew about this, they would care. And I think the novel goes to great lengths to show that that's not always the case. And I think it's really cool that we get to see Bale like have to come to terms with that really like painful realization and figuring out how he's gonna pull himself up and move forward for Leia.
The end of the by the end of the book, he's I'm interested where they're going to go in the next two books with it, but he's given up the entire goal of trying to clean the Jedi's name. No, we have that awesome scene where he's sitting there. I think he's in the garden, and I think he has visions of Padme at that point, or he thinks about Padme and Obi-Wan. And there's this statue of this Jedi who is brought up for the first time in this book, Thramus Argent. And he mentions that they're going to be taking that statue down. One, I'm sure it's to make sure that they're not aligned with Jedi because that's bad. But I think from a more symbolic perspective, it's showing that he's kind of giving up that quest and that he knows what he needs to do now, and it's not to sit there and only focus on cleaning the name of the Jedi. So I think we'll probably in the coming books see a little bit less about the Jedi.
Yeah, and Austin, you mentioned her name there, Padme. So I think this is a good opportunity for us to talk about or go into one of our first segments, which we are going to call Padme Watch.
I am Queen Amidala.
Funny little boy.
I call it aggressive negotiations.
This is how liberty dies. With thunderous applause.
I know you guys can't see my shirt right now, but I am wearing a Queen Amidala shirt. The two Austins are massive Padme fans, so it was very exciting to get little droplets of Padme throughout the book.
They mentioned that in the promotion for this book. This was going to be like Padme was, while not in the book, she weighed over it. And it's definitely true. Like multiple times throughout, Mon and Bale both wished they were Padme. They're like, Padme could do this thing that I'm not able to do. Yeah, it just goes to show like what a great character she is and how much her impact is felt throughout the rest of the series, even though she's really, in the grand scheme of Star Wars, she's only in a small portion. I think this book, probably more than any other material we have, really dives into that.
I like the connection of her as the mother for Leia, and that Bale keeps her in his thoughts. He knows he's raising her child and knows about Luke as well, and keeping them in his thoughts and how important they're going to be moving forward. He little does he know how important really, but that that's such an important connector to Padme, that her children are the one that save the galaxy.
I did tabulate as we were going through the whole book the number of mentions that we got. She got 31 separate mentions, which was pretty cool, and then two different indirect mentions. So she appears a good bit. To be completely honest, I was expecting her to appear just a touch more. I was hoping that it would dig a little bit deeper into the delegation of 2000. For those of you who are listening who have not seen those deleted scenes, the delegation of 2000 is essentially a delegation put together in the Senate to try to overturn the shocking executive powers that the chancellor has taken. And so she's one of the leaders of that. I like what you said, Austin, earlier about two really important characters, the Emperor and Padme, looming over the story, but not actually featuring in it. Um, and while I would have wanted more Padme, I think that I like kind of what's going on there, where Padme's kind of a ghost at this point. She's dead. She's gone. And I think part of it is her not being here kind of makes us feel the way that Mon Mothma and Bale might if we're looking forward to seeing her, where we want more of her and we can't have her because she's gone and she's dead. And so, especially that bit at the end in the garden when he thinks about Padme sitting there, I thought it was interesting how she was like skin and bone and basically nothing was left of her.
Is there anything else on Bale before we move on to kind of the third person in this story, but in some ways not the main character for that third perspective?
That's all I had for Bale.
All I want is for Alexander Freed or someone else to do a prequel to this book that actually talks about the delegation of 2000 like in depth.
Because this is the first actual canon reference to the delegation of 2000. It was in a Revenge of the Sith deleted scene, but it had never been featured anywhere else. And so this is the first time that that huge scene that I wish was in the movie is featured and talked about, but never before in canon.
We're ready to move on to Saw Gerrera. So, what do you guys think about Saw Gerrera?
I was really excited to see more of Saw Gerrera because we see him way later in the era of the Empire, Rebels, Rogue One, that kind of era. And so I was really excited, and I'm almost a little disappointed because he's not the focus. There's nice little nuggets in there, but then so much of what I expected to be his story is Sojin's story. This other character that we had never known before, his brand new first appearance, and so it almost left me wanting more Saw Gerrera and other things than really loving that part of the story.
Well, I think part of that might stem from a big mystery for Saul. He's kind of called out on it in the book. Is like, what are his actual motivations? Like, does
Mm-hmm.
he actually care about liberating people, or does he just want to fight?
Yeah,
And I think by having Saul not be a point of view character, you really keep that train of thought
mystery.
going. And there's
Yeah.
two more books, and I have to imagine he's going to be a point of view character at some point. Initially, I didn't care about Sojin for a very large portion of the book, and I was
Mm-hmm.
kind of frustrated that he was how we were learning about all this. But by the end, I think I appreciated what Freed was doing with it.
When you guys were reading and you were picturing Saw Gerrera, were you picturing Forrest Whitaker or were you picturing the Clone Wars?
Forrest Whitaker.
Forrest Whitaker. For
Picturing
sure.
Forrest Whitaker, which absolutely does not make any sense because he
Yeah.
looked almost identical to what he looked like in the Clone Wars. But I think that that's a testament to kind of what that character has become versus what he already was. As far as being a point of view character, I almost wonder if he's too stagnant, if his character
Oof.
traits don't really change. I mean, he's really the same warmonger he is the entire time. I don't know how much there is for us to see about him. I mean, it could still be interesting.
I think it's interesting. I went and I'm in a Rebels rewatch and just got through Ghosts of Geonosis, where he is very much on the side of the rebel cells and is considered a little bit of an extremist, but not the full-blown like crazy extremist yet. And so I'm kind of surprised. This is almost a backtrack on that of, okay, when the empire is created, is he right now an extremist? And in this book he is, but there's some disconnect, I think, a little bit between that story and Rebels, where he's a little bit extreme, but he still was sent on a mission by, I believe, Bail Organa in that. And they go to rescue him as a rebel cell. And then the connection with Andor of he is a rebel cell, he's working with these other people. So seeing him as an extremist, I wasn't expecting him to be seen as an extremist here.
It could be that he fluctuates a little bit. You know, by the end of the book, he's offering aid to people, and he's obviously doing
It's
it
true.
in a way
Yeah.
to recruit people. But he's not only, you know, he's definitely not only out for war. I mean, he's definitely that's his primary motivation. And it does make you question, just like how Bale and Mon did, what do you want? And he doesn't know what he wants. He knows that he has to keep fighting something. He was fighting on Onderon, and he has to keep fighting something, so he's fighting the Empire.
I found it really interesting that he was almost offered a governorship in the new empire. That to me
Hmm.
was a really interesting nugget in
Fascinating.
there. Yeah.
That was I had forgotten about
Well,
that.
and
He
it
would have been a
makes
terrible governor.
it would have been so bad, but it shows like what the empire was wanting, and that was military
Strong
people,
men.
not
Yeah.
politicians.
Yeah.
And I have to say, it's crazy. If you had asked me, like, I guess at this point, 10 years ago, who was going to be like the most frequently seen, like, minor character in Star Wars, I would not have guessed Saw Gerrera. But I think he's appeared in like every project that he
Yeah.
like could possibly appear in.
Oh my gosh, and he appears in
And
Jedi
he's
Fallen Order and
Yeah, and
yeah,
Rebels and
Catalyst
Rebels,
and Rebels.
Andor.
And so he's
yeah,
everywhere. He's everywhere.
he's
They just love to stick him in there.
and he was
He's yet
in
to
what,
have 1.
three episodes of Clone Wars.
Yeah,
Four.
4. He's yet to have a book that's just about him though. He's always a side character. He's always a part of the story, but never the main focus.
Yeah,
To be
I'm
completely honest,
assuming
I'm
we're gonna
okay with
get
that.
that.
Kind of the ultimate glimpse
I'm
show.
worried one of the next two books is going to be like really Saw heavy. And I'm sure that's going to be interesting for some people. That's just not what I'm going into it for. I really hope they stick with the political thriller genre.
My if I had to guess, If I had to guess, the next two books covers are going to look a lot like this one, but with Bale and with Saw on
Yeah.
I
them.
bet that's the case.
That would be my guess. And if I
So
had to guess, because when they announced this book, I want to say the cover came with the announcement. I think we all assumed it was going to be like a Mon Mothma book, but it
mhm,
was pretty evenly divided between the three. I think it was maybe a little Mon heavy compared to the
mhm.
other two, but it would not shock me if the other ones follow suit.
Talking about Saw Gerrera, do we want to talk about who really was the point of view with Sojin? This completely new character had not appeared yet, and this is his first appearance.
Yes,
And he was a
I
completely new race too.
Yeah. Star Wars has had different weird aliens from the start, which is going to lead us to another segment that we're going to call Alien Roll Call. Alien Roll Call is our opportunity to talk about all the different species of aliens, sentient species that get mentioned in Star Wars. Like I said, from the beginning, from the first movie, aliens have been a central part. They've been in the cantina, they've been everywhere throughout the story. And what we want to do is try and talk about the various alien species that are mentioned throughout the book. In this book, there were 30 sentient alien species mentioned. There were a few new species like Marushian kelp, which apparently is a sentient species in Star Wars. And I love those little things in there. That's what makes Star Wars so much more full.
Speaking of that, how did y'all imagine Sojin? In my head, he looked like Rook, Thrawn, little henchman.
That's funny. I just pictured him as a human, honestly. When I don't know what the race looks like, I just do human in my head, which is not fun, but
Pictured him as Ochi of Bestoon, kind of, with these
Okay.
ooh,
cybernetics and things
okay.
like that. That's how I pictured him. And I actually wrote down the descriptions. I went through the book, tried to write
Oh,
down
you
descriptions
did.
because
Cool.
the
Okay.
was it Alvadorgian has never appeared before. There's no pictures, there's no images, so I kind of wanted to try and take down the different little things that he has because he has so many cybernetics as well that are kind of new little treats. And I really like the addition of cybernetics, especially for Mon Mothma, her wound, but also this, as we've seen in the last 4 or 5 years, that become more prominent. He walks upright. He has knees. He has 2 hearts, shoulders, hands, feet. Eyes have retinas. He's blood and bone. He has military clothing with a hood. He's an uncommon species, so he's easily noticed. So it's a species that's not seen very much. One of the only indicators of his size is the shortest of the Powans who come and visit is taller than the oldest or tallest adult of his species. Now, Powans are naturally very tall compared to humans and other species, so he could just be about a human size. The only thing for his appearance that really stood out was he has scalp plating.
Which in
Part of his cybernetics, I guess.
Yeah, I'm not
in my head, I was
sure.
like, is that a metal plate on his head, or is it
I was picturing a
is
metal
it
Right.
plate.
like a crest?
Yeah, and then he has implants, muscle enhancements. He has electric in his hands to basically shock and stun and kill people. He has a data link that he can use to upload. Like I'm picturing he has a scomp link that like comes out of his arm or his elbow or something. Micro laser to cut literally people in half. He has the self-destruct that is obviously a main part and gets triggered,
Yeah,
even though he's aware that he has that within him, and he says it's totally under my control, but it's not.
and oubliette is not a word you're gonna forget.
Yeah. So that was kind of the main things that I was took, he's described as having cruel eyes, but his eyes have retinas, so they're not much
Mhm.
different perhaps than humans. There wasn't much, and it is, yeah, I know it's a pet peeve for I think all of us when there's a new alien species in a book and there's not a solid description, because then we just wait and see eventually what it will look like.
I wish they would just, and I'm sure a lot of times that they don't have a solid way of what it looks like. But it'd be nice if when they release these, like they were on the cover art, or they, although I love this cover art so much, but if they released an article on StarWars.com, like this is a new species, welcome, whatever they're called, it's the Alva Dorjian.
The other kind of also alien species that I had to look up and has appeared in other stuff is Haki as a Heptunian. That is one
Yes,
that I
from 9.
recognized from
No, it's from
eight.
eight. It's from
Eight.
In the
the
casino.
Canto
Yeah,
Bight.
in
Yeah,
Canto
Cantobite.
Bite.
Okay.
And they've appeared in a couple of the Canto Bite anthology stories, just two of them, I believe. But then this is the only really, I would say, the second appearance, so to speak, of Heptunians, which is a name of a species I recognized, I feel, before this. I've seen it elsewhere. But for Hockey, that was also a new one. And I had to look up a picture.
and it's not a pleasant picture.
It is not
No.
a pleasant picture, no. Scary, scary. Not a great
Yeah.
image for a spy to look.
Stands out, right? You would think, especially in
Yeah.
Coruscant, where it seems to be, at least from what we see, mostly humans.
The coolest thing about them in my mind was like the air pocket she had, like allowed her to have
Yeah.
like 30 minutes of
Yeah.
air. That was really cool. It's nice when the aliens are like actually alien and not just like humans with different color skin. They like have like different biologies. I think that's neat.
Actually, outside of those two, I don't have a whole lot to say.
There were a few that I wrote down that were interesting in terms of overall sentient species. There were a few that hadn't been mentioned, like Heptunian, as we mentioned. Seeing some other ones like Arcona and Aqualish. I just like when they're mentioned, like when they're part of the story and included. And I just want to always highlight those different species.
And another big part of Star Wars is the alien worlds. And I think, obviously the bulk of this book takes place on Coruscant, but a huge section of this book takes place on a new planet called Iod Juretz, which is kind of like this like ancient preserved world that because it was like off limits, like nobody was supposed to go on the surface. The separatists had like stored like a cache of materials and data there, and so that's what brought Bale and Hockey there, and it also brought Saw and his group there. That's kind of what got them to interact. I think it was cool to see. We don't really think about historic preservation in Star Wars very often,
No,
but I
we
think it
don't.
was like
Yeah.
I think it was cool. But my favorite use of it was I feel like it was pretty symbolic for Bale. So Saw blows up, or he like floods the ancient city, and destroys it. And I feel like it's a kind of like a physical manifestation of Bale having to let go of um, something, and or being forced to let go of something that he shouldn't have to let go of. Like Bale shouldn't have to let go of the Jedi and accept that what happened to them was. But just we had to accept it and move on. And Eye of Jared's like was a sacred, like holy place that had been preserved, and it was destroyed for a temporary need to get out of a rough patch that Saw and them were going through, and they just have to move on, and it's gone forever. They can never come back, and so I think that was a pretty important part.
I think it is also a big connector to what Saw Gerrera will resort to. He'll do what he feels is necessary, no matter what collateral damage there will be, no matter what impact there's going to be. If it suits him, he's going to blow this up and flood and destroy this city, which I found it even surprising that the Imperials then try and use that to label him a terrorist and mark him as an enemy of the state, essentially, because he destroyed this sacred historic location.
And they didn't actually care about that stuff.
No,
Yeah,
no, they
They
definitely
didn't
didn't.
actually care.
It's all about the politics.
I think a huge part of Saw's like function as a character beat in like every story he's in is Saw does something dramatic and radical, and the actual protagonists of the story have to like react to it. Like,
Oh my gosh.
like he blows something up, and then the hero's like has to learn the lesson, like, oh, this is not a good thing. And I think that's kind of the function here. Is it's probably the thing that most draws the distinction between Saw and Bale and Mon, is that Saw was willing to do that, and Bale and Mon saw the tragedy of it.
I would love to see a Dr. Aphra story visit Eodajuritz before this happens, as like a child with her father or something, as a flashback, and see what this place looked like and how important it was.
That would be amazing. And a good use of Dr. Aphra. She's like, if anybody explores historic preservation in Star Wars, it's
the archaeologist. Yeah,
And
yeah.
discussing Dr. Aphra, that leads us directly into connections of a wider galaxy.
Read them, have you?
I want to be the first one to
Sacred Jedi texts.
Seen a lot of strange stuff.
I want more, and I know it.
Easterners, they were not.
Connections to a Wider Galaxy is the segment where we're talking about how this book connects to other parts of Star Wars canon, and I think we've hit on a lot of that throughout, but I think there's a lot of specific things. The one that really stands out to me, in preparation for this episode, I went back and rewatched a couple episodes of Rebels that featured Saw and Mon Mothma and Vale. And one of my favorite scenes in Rebels is when Saw messages the rebellion, and he's like, he has the big image of his face blown up, and he and Mon Mothma kind of have like an exchange. And when we first watched Rebels, kind of the mindset was like this was their first time interacting. But now I'm like, oh, they have a lot of personal history. They have like 18 years of personal history at this point of disagreeing about ideals, and they're pushing and pulling at each other, trying to get them where the other person is. And it's neat to see that scene that was already really good have an extra layer of context to it.
Yeah, the connections to Rebels was pretty clear with Mon Mothma, how she stays in the Senate, how she's working from the inside. We see her working through this bill, but we know that she stays in the Senate for almost 17 more years. She leaves in 2 years before the Battle of Yavin. And so we know that she stays in, and we know that Bale eventually leaves and gives up his seat to Leia. And so we see them still working that political side of it, trying to scrape what they can together.
How does this connect to Andor?
Yeah, with Mon Mothma, so much of her activity in the Senate, this starts what she's working with. And part of me was hoping, although maybe we'll see in the future 2 novels in this series, a connection to Luthen, and seeing when does the connection to Luthen start? When does she start funneling money and more things towards it? Because we know at the end of this story, there's no formal alliance. They're all still kind of going to be working independently. So I was thinking that there would be a stronger connection to Luthen, but he's a connector between Mon Mothma and Saw Gerrera by the time of Andor. But I think seeing her in the Senate trying to work through these things is still true. But by the time of Andor, she's almost done with that. She's a political outcast even more. She's not able to get those things done, and she's ready to get out.
The another connection is she makes a passing mention to her cousin Vel, who's like a big
Mm-hmm.
part of Andor, and something we haven't touched on at all is Perrin.
Perrin.
Perrin is
Yes.
a
Yeah.
big part
The
of the book,
problem with
and
Perrin.
I would say compared to Andor, he is a little more sympathetic to Mon.
Absolutely.
Because this is a novel, you can hear like interior thoughts of what they're thinking, and so you kind of get the idea that they have a at this point in their relationship, it's a very like on and off relationship. They have periods where they're into each other, periods where they're not. Um, and while the character is not on the page, we see the beginning of Modern Parents' daughter's life
Yeah. Yep.
in the last chapter.
It was absolutely filthy.
This is his only his second inclusion in the canon. Andor was the first. This is only the second.
And I'm sure over the next two books, we'll kind of see that marriage start to fall apart a little bit more. You can kind of see some cracks already. I mean, it's by no means a perfect, by Mon's own admission, love-filled marriage.
Right.
They're
I would say
together.
it's pretty cracked already.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's pretty cracked, but it's tolerable. It's not like antagonistic. By Andor, it feels a little antagonistic. It's going to be interesting to watch how that develops.
Kind of related to Mon's marriage, one of my favorite connections to the wider canon is between this and Leia, Princess of Alderaan. This is more just like a funny connection. Towards the end of this book, when Mon's being interrogated, they ask her if she's having, like, what her relationship with several people is, and she says she's having an affair with Senator Ludroy, and she does that to get them off her back. And it's really funny because there's a scene in Leia, Princess of Alderaan where they're having a meeting of the rebellion at the palace, and Tarkin shows up, and they're really trying to get Tarkin off. And the way they get Tarkin to leave is Brea accuses Mon and Bale of having an affair with each other.
Oh, so this is like a first attempt for Mon Mothma and this group to use like an affair as
As a way
a
to
distractor. Yeah.
Clearly, they love
as a
it.
way to get out of an awkward moment.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh,
This is
that's
also
good.
related to Leia, Princess of Alderaan. They spent a lot of time in Bale's estate, Cantham House, and I think that
Yeah.
when's it first actually named as such? Is it Leia, Princess of Alderaan?
I think so.
So I thought that was interesting to bring that back. I loved the Brea.
Yeah, that's what I was gonna say is there's a lot of connection to Brea and seeing her and knowing what she's trying to do. We see in Rebels that Alderaan is active in the rebellion and not that subtle about it. And even here they mention, he's under review, he's being watched from the start. And not just him, but Brea too. Their residence is bugged, is being listened to. And we see that later on with Leia when she appears in Rebels, that they know, hey, Alderaan, that you seem to lose these ships fairly often. We're going to lock them down. And I thought that was really interesting that I think in this book at one point there's a mention that like they know that he's active in this and really kind of against the Empire, but Alderaan is too prominent in the core to do that much about it. Obviously, by A New Hope, that's no longer the case, but it is interesting to see how prominent Alderaan plays in relief missions and aid and stuff like that throughout the reign of the Empire.
I don't know. I don't have my copy of Leia, Princess of Alderaan with me, so I wasn't able to verify it. But I'm pretty sure it's in that book that Bale and Mon explained to Leia that they like have their fights in the Senate, like not the two of their fights, but like they try to write the bills curbing Palpatine's power and everything as a way to make the Empire think that's the extent of their rebellion. Like they do that as a way to be like we're trying to fight this legally and we're
Through the
not
prominent,
associated with through the proper channels, and they do that as a cover up of their
that's
their
good
back channels.
Yeah, and then we have the opposite of Saw Gerrera doing the violence, doing the action, doing all of that, and we see that in Bad Batch as well, where he's blowing things up. He's antagonistic. He's violent. And so we see that thread pulled through of he's this person that consistently, as we mentioned earlier, does the thing that's just going to help him no matter the collateral damage that's going to happen. And this story is happening not too long after we see him in Bad Batch. I think that's probably his next appearance. And so I'm curious as we move forward in this series, how far the next book is going to go in the future. Is it going to be just a couple years? It will come out in spring of 2026. So I wonder how far will we advance? Will we pass when we see him in Bad Batch?
I'm expecting a little bit of a time jump.
Yeah, I'm expecting time. It wouldn't shock me if it's like after Mon has her daughter and everything. But I can't imagine it's going to go um, too deep into the Andor timeline either. I know they've said
Never.
Andor season 2 is going to end like right before Rogue One starts, and I don't know they're going to want like Mon's going to be so involved in that, and it probably Saw and possibly Bale as well. I don't know they're going to want to get like tread the same ground. We know that
I think the books will
they're
lead up
pretty.
right to Andor.
We know they're pretty conscious of like having their stuff bump up against each other in ways that are like constraining in terms of canon.
Right. That's why I expect Luthen to show up at least by the end of the trilogy at some point.
I bet the third
That's a
book
pretty
is we'll
important, a pretty important connector to Andor and Mon Mothma.
If he needs to show up and give one of his like impromptu, just really cutting monologues.
Yeah.
I love a good monologue. Do you guys have any other thoughts for the next two books? What are you hoping to happen?
I would really love to see Mon writing another bill. That'd be
I would
particularly
too. I want to
thrilling
see more
for me.
politics. Let's do it. But I want to kind of watch it, slowly fade away. Like she's slowly not able to get more support as people realize the Empire is entrenched in their position, and as the Senate continues to lose power, I kind of want to see the bills also start to fail slowly. I think that'd be interesting.
Right. Yeah. This one, the bill passed, but it doesn't mean much. Next one, maybe the bill doesn't pass. It doesn't succeed, and that would be an interesting kind of evolution over time of even like the structure of how they pass bills in the Senate changing. The laws revolving around that getting manipulated, getting changed by Palpatine, Masameda, and others.
What we see in Andor, like when Mon like gives a speech in the Senate, and there's like nobody there, like people aren't showing up to actually do any Senate work
There's no
anymore.
point.
So I'm sure we'll see some evolution towards that. Something I don't know that I'm like excited about it because it wasn't my favorite part of the book, but I'm interested to see what they do with it because clearly they have a plan. Is all the stuff with Chimbish and Hockey and that storyline, like figuring out we didn't really get like super clear on all the mechanism of like why Zuna was assassinated and what all the 4040 are up to and everything. I think they probably have a larger plan for that. 'Cause this was a very like as far as Star Wars would go, this was a fairly long one and it was very dense. And that it would have been pretty easy to remove that stuff. So I think they have a bigger plan going forward.
Especially that they have those chapters at the end about Hockey and Chemis reuniting and where they're going to go and trying to figure out, okay, now we're not in the Imperial Security Bureau system or organization anymore. So what do we do?
And Kamara as well. Kamara got an end chapter.
Yep.
And I think it's interesting having a journalist with Saw, and what the implications of that could be.
Cool. Well, yeah, the next book doesn't have a name yet, but we'll be waiting for Rebecca Roanhorse's book to come out in spring of 2026. And I bet we'll do another review as this one was a lot of fun and we had a good time going through it, talking about it and sharing it with you all.
Absolutely. You guys can expect to see more book reviews, comic reviews, video game reviews, TV reviews, movie reviews. We're going to do it all. As far as the next episode goes, I think, we're operating here on a bi-weekly basis. So I think you guys can expect to hear from us again once Andor season 2 releases. Can you guys believe it? It's actually pretty close.
Yeah. Less than a month.
Less than a month. We're recording this into March.
And we've got Celebration coming up, Vision Season 3. There's no shortage of Star Wars material on the horizon.
No, it's a perfect time to start a podcast.
Yep.
All right, then.
Thanks for joining us, everyone.
Thanks everyone for joining us to talk about the galaxy far, far away. You can find us on Instagram, Blue Sky, YouTube, and TikTok as Rogue3 Media. We look forward to talking with you at the next rendezvous point.